what happens with triggers is that there is something stored that gets triggered by what someone says, what someone does, and then the neural pathway kicks in to relive the experience that we have before and the belief system attached to it. And that can be in multiple different ways. And obviously, we've got to take captive the initial response to a trigger and redirect it towards the truth, the mind of Christ. Take captive every thought and bring it to obedience to the mind of Christ. So what does God think? And that is not an easy process, because sometimes we find ourselves almost way down the pathway to that before we've caught it. But what I tried to do, and when I became more meditative or more reflective and less reactionary, by being more at peace with myself, then I found it easier to reflect on my responses and reactions and thoughts and feelings in any situation. When we know God's unconditional love and we're not moved by guilt, shame, condemnation, which is usually coming from religious programming, the wrong view of God as the angry God, the God who needs appeasement, then it's safer, because we know we're loved unconditionally, to allow God and ourselves to go to the place where we evaluate our responses, reactions to situations. And God took me through a little process called trauma to transformation. When I was sufficiently secure in my relationship with God and not motivated by condemnation or shame because I failed or got something wrong or reacted the wrong way, then I was more open to look at the process and look at what went on as I did that. And I found that when I reacted, and I would really deliberately try and look at how I was feeling. Now, sometimes you can't respond in the moment, because if you try and respond in the moment of conflict or opposition or argument or something that's flared up that's going on between you and someone else, then you've got to try and calm that situation down and calm yourself down. And logically, trying to win the argument never does it, And so, in a sense, we have to try and bring a calm into the situation by not trying to fight or win an argument or overcome someone else's opposition or whatever they're going on. And obviously not easy, but you can learn how to do it. And initially it's like, what is that initial feeling, thought? What am I going to fire back with in this situation? Am I going to defend myself? Am I going to go on the attack? How am I going to maintain safety and security in the threat? And usually our unconscious mind will kick in with fight, flight, freeze. So that's normal, the sort of the reaction. Am I going to run from this? Am I going to stand my ground? Or I'm going to freeze in fear, and depending on how we're wired, one of those can be primarily the normal response for us. At that point, adrenaline starts to kick in. Now, you can begin to detect adrenaline. You can begin to detect that fight, flight, freeze in emotion. And at that point, really seek for what would Jesus do? So that's the sort of, you can wear it on your bracelet, but you've got to actually be able to, in that moment, look to find the way to deal with that situation in the best possible manner. Usually that's to back off from the aggressive stance or the fight or the argument or the overbearing emotion or whatever it might be. And it's not you don't need to win an argument at that point, you know, because actually all you'll do is reinforce your automatic responses to those situations rather than change them. So if you can at that point back off, what that allows you to do is, generally speaking, if there's a situation where you're being confronted, you don't have to justify yourself to somebody else in that situation. You can essentially be conciliatory and say sorry. You know, so many people don't say sorry, including myself, you know, at times, because I think I'm right. And I want to self-justify because they're wrong and they're treating me bad and they're doing, well, a lot of that's to do with ego, and it's to do with self, and it's to do with self-worth and all of that stuff that's being threatened by someone. Now, if I know my value and worth in God, it doesn't really matter what they think, actually, or what they're trying to say or not say. I'm secure in God. But if it triggers me, then that's what I can then take back to God in this process of trauma to transformation. And I taught it in the transformation series, and it's in the Engaging God program as a flow diagram. First thing to do, I need to forgive and release. So at the point where I'm being attacked, that's the time to choose to forgive the person. Make that be your first response. And you don't have to do it out loud, because if you say, I choose to forgive you, that is going to inflame the situation, because actually they're going to take it as you're saying they're in the wrong and I'm in the right, and I'm going to take the high ground and I'm going to forgive you. Just do it internally. You know, if we are to live in peace, you know, and some people have to say it out loud and it just makes it worse, you know, so do it internally. And choose that ground. I am going to choose to forgive, and I'm going to release you in, and I can do it in my mind, and I'm going to direct it to that person, and I'm going to bless them, and I'm going to want the best for them, because when I truly forgive, Jesus said, forgive your enemies, bless them, you know, pray for them. So internally, because you can do more than one thing at the same time, you can focus your attention towards good thoughts towards the person and begin to remove the tension out of the situation. And the easiest thing to do is to say, look, I'm really sorry. You know, and you can say, look, I wasn't aware you were thinking like that or whatever. I'm really sorry. Now, if you say sorry, it's hard for them to continue because you've just said sorry. And it doesn't matter whether they're right or what you're trying to do is remove the tension from the situation. Just say sorry. It's the easiest thing to do to remove any sort of fighting is to say, I'm sorry. You know, now what then I would do in my own personal situation, when I then back out of that situation, I have space, I don't just forget the situation. I ask the Father to take me through the process of trauma to transformation. So, yeah, once I've done the forgiveness, then I've removed any room the enemy has to use that situation for my harm. You know, Ephesians talks about, I think it's Ephesians 4, don't let the sun go down of your anger and give a place or room for the devil. Now, what that really means is if we don't deal with forgiveness issues, it will give the enemy an opportunity to get behind that and to make us feel bad, or to bring that and sow those seeds of disharmony, discontent in our spirit, in our heart, effectively. So, you know, Jesus talked about the parable of the sower and the condition of the soil of our heart. We can harden our heart towards somebody. That will never produce anything good if we harden our heart towards someone. Guarding our heart is different from hardening our heart. We can guard our heart so that we don't let our offense affect us negatively. If we harden our heart, we're basically creating an area of our heart which is now not open to life in God. you know, because that area is not going to flow life. So also we got to make sure that we don't have stones in our heart, which is the memories of what someone has done. So I must make sure that what's just happened is not been stored in my heart as a memory, which will then trigger future experiences with that person and with others. So I've got to be careful. Forgiveness is the best way, because I do not want that seed, which may have been sown by that person, by something they said, something they did, to take root in my heart and produce roots of bitterness. Because if I have bitter root judgments in my heart towards that person, that will cause the reciprocation to come back on me. Because what you judge gets judged upon you. So you don't want to you want to make sure that there aren't any memories, bitter root judgment stones that are in our heart, and then effectively mean it's harder for good things to grow when our heart is full of soil. And the obviously other thing is the sort of cares of life, the worry, the concerns, the anxiety, the emotional experiences that we have, which effectively, you know, like weeds, choke out the seed. You know, so it's really important that we look after our heart, look after the soil, make sure the state of our heart is good. But I then can go through the process of what triggered my reaction. So in this situation, let's say I managed to control my emotions and my reactions and didn't fire off, but I still felt them. What triggered them? What triggered that reaction in me? Was that a memory that hasn't been dealt with? Was that a area of my heart which needs healing, which needs restoration because it's not been healed and restored? Therefore, that's an area which is wounded, and I'm still wounded in my heart. That's one thing. There may be an unmet need in my heart that highlighted. So I have a need for acceptance, and they rejected me and they were negative towards me, and therefore it triggered my need for acceptance. And that can cause us to react wrongly in the situation, sometimes by aggressively fighting back, and sometimes by being passive. And either of them are different. Some people are very passive in a situation because they don't want to be rejected, so they fear being real. And others are just so angry that they're going to get in the first blow almost and make sure they're not going to be hurt. You know, none of that really works. You know, so asking questions of the Father is a good process. And I go through the sort of flow of questions that you can ask to look at where is this trigger coming from, you know, and then once you identify it, what's behind it? Is there something spiritual behind it, as in some sort of spiritual familiar spirit? I can do a court case. I can get a verdict that separates me from that familiar spirit. I can apply that verdict to my heart and break the neural pathway. Because if the neural pathway is still in place, it's very hard not to go down it. You've got to fight really hard not to go down a neural pathway, because it's linked to something within our heart, which is a program. If we can break the neural pathway and put the verdict or the truth in place of the lie or the programming I've been living from, then when an event happens or a circumstance takes place, it doesn't trigger you, because the verdict is what's there. So immediately you go to the verdict is, I'm free. I don't need to react this way. I know I'm accepted by God. I'm not going to be rejected by this person. It's not going to affect me, you know. And you can do that and cleanse your heart, really, and see your heart cleansed from all the stones and from the weeds and the anxieties and worries and cares and concerns and the hardness that we may have. Our heart might have been trampled by people who treated us really badly. That's not a good thing to have in our heart. So we need it plowed up. We need it to be brought back into a good state that can receive good soil, because hard hearts won't receive anything good. So, ask God the question, talk him through the process, find out where the triggers are, what they're related to, and get them removed from our heart so that we have a heart which is flowing in life, in which we receive good seed that is fertile, that produces good fruit, rather than has roots of bitterness and fruits of resentment. Because ultimately what comes out is what is in our heart. And if there are bitter roots there, resentment will be how we operate on the surface, and that's what people will see. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc, and we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.